Okay, I think we are all set now. Almost. All right, thank you everyone for joining us here. My name is Carolina Cooney, and I'm the programming coordinator at the Oak Bluffs Public Library on Martha's Vineyard. And today we are having a talk about cryptocurrencies. This is Cryptocurrencies 101, and it's intended as a purely educational seminar. None of us are experts. We are just interested in it and have been learning about it and want to share our knowledge. Not me particularly, but our host would like to. So I have Curt Cetrulo here, who has been on the Vineyard since 1978, and he's been learning about cryptocurrencies for quite a while. He's going to share what he knows. And I also have Victoria Hazelbar, who is the social outreach coordinator at the Edgartown Council on Aging. And I will let Curt take it away in just a moment. I also wanted to let you know that we do have closed captioning. If needed, you can just turn on the live transcript and show subtitle. So, thank you very much for being here, Curt.
Welcome, I'm glad to be here.
All right, take it away.
So we've labeled this like your first introductory college course, the Cryptocurrencies 101. And I just have been educating myself about this for a while and just want to share what I've learned in this educational seminar. And I have invited Victoria to join me because she actually attended a course that we put on the Vineyard a couple of years ago and became very knowledgeable about the blockchain, which is the underlying technology for the cryptocurrencies. And she's going to do a presentation to explain what that is and give an example of how with healthcare, that's a logical thing to use the blockchain, which is just a ledger for recording all of this. So I would like to just go through 10 basic questions. Carolina, if you could just show the first question. This is actually entitled Everything You Need to Know to Sound Smart About Cryptocurrencies, which is a little misleading, I guess, but it at least gives you the basic information that we're trying to convey. So we could scroll down to that a little. So first question is, what's a cryptocurrency and what are the different types? So basically, a cryptocurrency is a digital asset designed to work as a medium of exchange, where individuals can own coins on this, and the records are put in a ledger existing on a computer, on a database. And the underlying technology for that is the blockchain, which we'll come to. You often, we could just scroll up a little bit, you'll often see a question about what is mining. And mining actually is a way to generate more coins. For example, the two most common coins, Bitcoin and Ether or Ethereum, are mined just like you would mine gold or something like that. And it used to be that you could do that on a simple computer, but now you have to use big computers and databases and things like that. So just so you're aware of what that is, that's the way you generate all of these coins. And if you, for example, mine Bitcoin, then you earn a couple Bitcoin when you do that. So we go to the next slide. And that is the question of what is the blockchain? And just simply, the blockchain is a ledger for logging in transactions electronically. And I'm going to let Victoria explain that in more detail when she does her part of the presentation. So the next question is, how is the value determined? And basically, the value is like anything else. This is like any other asset, like stocks or bonds or real estate, gold and silver. And the value is determined by what somebody else might pay for it. And that's simply the way it is. And you should be aware that the value of these cryptocurrencies is very, very volatile. They bounce around like crazy, and you have to just be patient if you're watching the price of these things. If you scroll up a little, what are the risks of investing? I would always say, do not invest in the cryptocurrencies for anything that, with any amount of money that you can't afford to lose. And you can invest as little as $100 and buy partial Bitcoin or partial Ether, or you can invest more than that. But I would just, again, emphasize, I would not invest more than you can afford to lose. And that goes down to the next question, how much you should invest. And that's like anything else. You can invest as much as you like. But one of the things that I would say about that is that this represents another asset class. And it might be reasonable to have a little bit of these cryptocurrencies in whatever assets you own. Stocks, bonds, real estate, other things. It would make sense to have a small amount, probably not more than 10%, invested in cryptocurrencies. And that would certainly be what I would suggest. We could scroll down to the next question. Then the question is, how do you store Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies? Well, there are two ways that you can buy cryptocurrencies. You can buy them on what are called exchanges, and Coinbase and Gemini are the two biggest exchanges. I happen to use Gemini because I'm a Gemini, and that was simplest for me to engage with. And so that's where I have what I've used to buy and store these. Now, it's important that you recognize that if you have them on one of these exchanges, that's called a soft wallet. And sometimes you will see things where these wallets are hacked or things like that. But there's a way to avoid that, which we'll discuss in just a moment. But what you do is you hook up a bank account to either Coinbase or Gemini, and then you transfer the funds. And when you decide you want to invest in Bitcoin or Ether or a number of these other coins that are called altcoins or alternative coins, then you would just buy them, and they would hold them on those exchanges, which are relatively safe because they're huge. But again, we'll discuss how you can protect yourself. Now the question comes, how do you spend cryptocurrencies? Well, there's a list that you can click on to try to look at that. But basically, some of the biggest companies, Microsoft, Subway, there's probably over 100 companies where you can actually spend the Bitcoin. But what a lot of people do is just buy these and hold them as an investment, and don't really use them to buy things. And the example of that is that when Bitcoin was not worth very much, somebody spent 10,000 Bitcoins to buy a pizza. And that pizza today is worth millions of dollars. So that was probably not a good way to spend, the 10 Bitcoin. The last question is all this for real? And more investment people are getting involved in this, including, you can now buy these coins on an exchange, and, the information about how you do that. But it probably is for real. The blockchain is something that I believe, will be used in a lot of different industries. And, maybe we could turn this over to Victoria, and she could explain exactly what the blockchain is, or this underlying technology underneath all of these cryptocurrencies. So, Victoria, would you like to do that at this point?
Sure. I'm just implementing the screen share right now, so it might take a moment for it to be visible to all of you. I'll start by saying that not long ago, I completed a degree program in healthcare administration, and upon completion of my coursework, I was asked to do a capstone project. And this type of degree is a very dry subject. So I thought, well, what can I do that's interesting? And that's when Curt stepped in and he invited me to a cryptocurrency conference that he had organized, where Curt had speakers from all over the world talking about the subject. And I was captivated by the possibility of doing my paper on how the blockchain and Bitcoin can solve problems in the healthcare industry and for the 360 million people who use healthcare today. I didn't at first think I was going to find a lot of information, but there's tons out there, and this can really revolutionize the way we do things. So I'll begin. Before I talk more about the blockchain, I'll talk a little bit about who invented the blockchain and when it happened and why they did it. So here we see in 1991, someone identified a cryptographically secure chain of blocks. It hadn't been implemented, but this individual discerned that it could be done. And then 7 years later, a computer wizard, Nick Szabo, he invented BitGold. And there was a lot of talk about it and sensation at the time, but it really didn't go anywhere. Not until the years later, when people began, like Stephen Const, for example, began publishing articles on how this might be implemented. And finally, in 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto, which was actually a group of sophisticated developers, implemented the first blockchain and the ability to use Bitcoin on the blockchain. So they named it the blockchain, and they named the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. And it's still the most popular currency out there, even though many others have emerged. In 2014, we took a significant leap in that blockchain technology separates from currency. So we see all sorts of other things emerging from that. For example, Ethereum, which writes smart contracts. So developers were able to figure out that on the blockchain, they can insert code within these different blocks. And those blocks are able to execute contracts when all the terms of the contracts are met. So this was a huge leap. And also we saw a lot of investors jumping in at this time in 2014. And the reason why all this is being done is that the blockchain can solve tremendous issues throughout the world and completely revolutionize the way we do absolutely everything. So moving on to the next slide, this is important because we all want to know how Bitcoin and the blockchain can affect us. And right now, I think most of us, including myself, are marginally aware of how it's already percolating and working below the surface. So the first thing I have here is cross-border payments. So if we want to send money to a relative in the mountains of Iraq, so that they can fly home and be with us, that's a pretty tall order. But with the blockchain, it can be done within 6 to 7 seconds simply by pressing a button on your phone. You'll be able to send direct digital money transfer anywhere around the world. And typically, if we want to send money now, there's a delay. It might be up to a week's delay in the amount of time it takes to transfer money. And oftentimes there's a large fee associated with that, up to 7%. Whereas with the blockchain, we do away with the intermediary or the bank, and we can send money directly to the other party. Secondly, supply chain management will be affected. So, and supply chain management is simply a network of entities that creates a finished product. So we begin with the raw material suppliers, and then we go through the whole manufacturing process, and then eventually that product ends up at a distribution site. And we know that a well-organized supply chain can ensure productivity and minimize fraud and can reduce delays and overhead costs. But we usually don't see that happen because supply chain management is a difficult job. It's very chaotic. There's lots of lost goods. There's lots of inefficiency. It costs a ton of money. What blockchain does is it brings interoperability to supply chain management. So anyone involved in the supply chain can go on their computer and in real time see the transparency of exactly where that product is in its development. So that reduces the risk of goods getting stuck somewhere in the supply chain, which happens every day. It also offers scalability at unimaginable levels. So you could be, in supply chain management anywhere in the world and transparently see across the globe exactly where something is on the chain. And it's hard to articulate the exact mechanism with which that will happen because it's still in its infancy. But there are major manufacturers and distributors such as Walmart who are already using this to their advantage. And I do have friends and colleagues who order supplies from Walmart and say that the goods arrive almost immediately to their doorstep, anything they order. And that's perhaps a feature of the blockchain being utilized in their supply chain management. So the third topic here is accountability and contracts. So we create contracts essentially because there's a lack of trust among transacting parties. We go through these legal procedures of creating contracts, which require lawyers, require tons of time and paperwork and a lot of money. Not to mention, I'm sure some of us, when they've received a contract, have had to drive around and get signatures on that contract. The blockchain, and most notably Ethereum, which emerged in 2014, will likely over time replace traditional contracts and agreements as we know them. So in a few lines of code stored on the block, the code is programmed to execute certain actions in the contract as soon as the terms are met. So it will streamline all contractual processes. And, unfortunately, one of the drawbacks of that is that it might put a lot of people out of work. We just don't know at this time. The third thing that Bitcoin and the blockchain can help with is identity theft. So your identity is who you are, where you live, your passport number, your social security number, your driver's license number, and so on. And all of this information is used by governments and stored in centralized databases, which are easily hacked. We read all the time how hackers intrude upon sensitive data and then commit fraud as a result. The blockchain will eliminate that. It's a decentralized platform, so the individual who has their content stored on it will have their own private key in which they can access their data, and then they can share that key with a public official, such as a government official, who'll then be able to go in and verify that data. So it's highly secure, and your data isn't going to be stored on other people's computers where it can be hacked. So that's something I really love about this, and I hope to see it in the years to come. Another thing is very important, digital copyright and privacy. The film and TV industry lose $71 billion a year because of copyright infringement. And how big media houses like Sony and others are constantly fighting legal wars against piracy and illegal distribution of media. Blockchain can help artists and creators digitalize their content with timestamps that are on immutable ledgers. So the creator can safely put their content on an open market and then immediately know once a copyright infringement has occurred and take legal proceedings. So the blockchain allows you to know anytime someone accesses your information, which is huge. And importantly, it creates a sort of transparent real-time tracking, which can lead to consumption-based pricing mechanisms. And I often think of my cable TV bill. I don't want to pay $150 for my cable TV because I only watch television 3 hours a week. But eventually, through the blockchain, we'll be able to use consumption-based pricing so that Comcast will know that I've only watched 3 hours of programming, what those 3 hours were, and then price and bill me accordingly. So that will eventually lead to a reduction in the cost that we pay for some of our utilities. Crowdfunding is another one. Crowdfunding platforms are plagued with a whole slew of problems, from investor abuse and illegal transactions and so forth. And it creates fear in the mind of investors. So with blockchain, a user can buy a token with US currency and then support their startup or company by simply using the token rather than using their own cash. And lastly, the government. So most of our local governments and public sectors worldwide rely on outdated methods for all their processes, which are slow, expensive, and allow for a lot of corruption. And this can result in an increased distrust between the government and its people, which translates to more problems within the state. But blockchain-based government models allow businesses and governments and individuals to securely share resources within a distributed ledger with peace of mind. And this ledger is immutable, so you don't have to worry about fraud or data manipulation. It also makes governments more accountable because their operations become transparent, which ultimately will reinforce people's faith in the system. So one of the things that I did during my capstone project was I had to figure out a way to explain to my professors what the blockchain really was, because they weren't familiar with it. And it's very difficult for everyone to imagine because it's so obscure and not visually tangible. So I created a metaphorical story to help my professors understand how the blockchain actually operates. And I'll share that with you, hoping that it will give you a better understanding. So I created an imaginary hospital, let's call it Sunset Hospital, where everything goes wrong and quality patient care is declining, revenues are falling, patients are being overbilled. The hospital won't treat those on Medicaid because they won't get reimbursed as much. Doctors are accepting kickbacks from drug companies, and they get payoffs for client referrals. And disgruntled employees are blaming the government for low reimbursement rates. So this is just a deplorable place. Fortunately, Sunset Hospital has a newly appointed board of directors who hire a new CEO. And this is a brilliant CEO who decides to create a metaphorical blockchain using employees as the blocks in the chain rather than electronic bits. So she gathers the whole staff in the auditorium, everyone from neurosurgeons down to the custodians, and she gives them each a notebook. And the CEO tells them that they have to document everything they do during the course of their day on one of its pages. And essentially documenting all the transactions they do throughout the day. So the janitor writes down each cleaning product he uses, what rooms he cleans, and when. And the surgeon documents every client interface, every preoperative test performed, and all the transactions throughout the day. Then the group of employees meet regularly in the auditorium, and they share everything they've done with everyone else as a verification. And they have to use indelible ink, so none of their transactions can be altered in any way. Each employee has to record their knowledge of the transactions of all the other employees. And when everyone has been informed of one another's transactions, the transactions are considered verified and updated. Lastly, to ensure that there's no centralized involvement, the CEO distributes Rubik's cubes, and the first employee to complete the puzzle earns a Bitcoin. So that's the end of the story. And I know it's exhaustive to imagine, but it paints the picture of what a blockchain consists of. And the miners are the puzzle solvers who make sure everything is accurate. And, you know, in theory, the blockchain is removing intermediaries, like the banks, for instance, from transactions. Contracts with insurance companies will be seamless and reduce negotiation and transactional times. The ordering of durable goods in the hospital and within other companies will occur automatically using an algorithm based on usage. Billing errors will be reduced, and healthcare, as well as most other global enterprises, will begin running a lot more smoothly. So I know the Bitcoin, you know, I said earlier, and as did Curt, it's a very disruptive technology, and it's really going to take us a while to introduce. I think there's will be multi-layers to its implementation, and it's going to affect the economy in a big way. You know, just as the internet dissolved barriers in interpersonal communication, cryptocurrency and the blockchain will reduce barriers in global marketing and allowing everyone from the poorest, you know, in developing nations to the wealthiest to store their wealth in electronic currency and be dependable payers. And from a healthcare perspective, I think this is going to allow us to reach global health equity and universal health coverage, but it's going to take time. One of the most notable things that Curt and I mentioned earlier is the blockchain and Bitcoin remove intermediaries, such as banks, from transactions. And again, this is going to reduce financial barriers to those living in remote areas or who are poorer. And it has the potential of propelling economic growth throughout the world by providing much easier access to capital and financial services I think the greatest effect is going to be in developing countries. We see that already it's taking on steam. It has been for many years. Investors are rapidly adding cryptocurrency to their portfolios. We're seeing, who is it, Tesla recently? We're seeing an explosion there, and other big investors really trying to buy up as much Bitcoin as possible. And a very valuable thing regarding Bitcoin is it's largely free from the economic and political pressures that, depending on what country you live in, really can affect traditional currency. And as Curt said, it creates a new kind of market and new opportunities where no authority or individual controls the money market. The Bitcoin bypasses regulations and authority through initial coin offerings, where startups and small businesses around the world can sell coins and get businesses going. And as I said, it propels economic growth throughout the world by providing much easier access to capital and financial services. So I thought I'd take a minute to talk a little bit about our healthcare system. It's what I did my paper on, but it's also something that affects all of us. And we've all had problems in the recent past, confusion with the bills that we receive. We struggle with high healthcare premiums from the insurance companies. And the Affordable Care Act did a lot to help a lot of people, but it also added a lot of layers of bureaucracy and high costs to health care. It required a lot on the part of both patients and physicians. We see more patients struggling paying their high premiums. We see a lot of billing errors. We hear patients complain that they have no time with their doctors. But doctors are struggling too. They don't have the time often to see more patients because of lowered reimbursement rates through the Affordable Care Act and quality guidelines that they have to follow. And it's been a struggle for them because of new electronic medical record implementation, which isn't interoperable, which costs a ton of money. And it's not fair to them. It's not fair to the patients. It's not fair to the doctors. And despite all of this, we're still seeing healthcare go up 8.2% a year, which is a staggering figure. And it's growing faster than our gross national product. And I mean, the fraud is rampant. The administration costs are high. Drug costs are high. Fraud is skyrocketing, and it's 144 million patient records were hacked in 2018, and Medicare loses about $14 billion a year because of poor security measures. So they're not doing a good job. They're failing somewhere. And this is where blockchain can do away with all this. I mean, healthcare now is the largest employer in the country, but it also wastes the most money. So one of the things that the blockchain and Bitcoin can do is it can create interoperability among all of our healthcare systems. So I'm sure most of you have gone to another hospital like Falmouth Hospital, let's say, but because they're not on the partner's gateway, they don't have immediate access to your medical records. So they have to set up a whole new account for you. And the reason that all of the healthcare systems aren't interoperable is because of hacking and fraud. So they believe if they contain it within their small network, it'll be safer. But if we introduce blockchain, it will make it safe for everyone So systems around the globe will become automatically interoperable and also impenetrable by hackers. And it will also streamline compliance departments. So a lot of healthcare costs are hospitals trying to comply with certain government regulators. And a lot of that will be done away with and automatically happen through the blockchain and through smart contracts when certain things within the hospital have been accomplished. The downside for a lot of people is that it's going to eliminate billing and coding departments. So they'll be rendered obsolete, and there's going to be a lot of people out of jobs as a result. And auditing and accountant departments are going to become a thing of the past. And again, people are potentially can lose work. So all in all, I think it's going to be just a wonderful way to streamline processes, but ultimately it's going to result in people losing work. One of the ways it's going to help a lot of companies and individuals is your financial data can be, including your tax forms, can be automatically routed to the IRS, and the IRS will have a key, a special key authorized by you that they'll be able to use on tax filing day, where they'll be able to see all of your data. So it'll make it very easy when tax time comes. So hopefully we'll see this in the future. It's just how are we going to see it without crashing our economy and putting millions of people out of work? So blockchain by far is the safest means of digital transfer. Information that's put on one of these blocks is digitally hashed into the block. So hashing is essentially just the fingerprint of the person putting the information on the block, and it creates an indelible audit trail. So if you're putting information on there, you know that no one is going to go in there and tamper with it. Or if you're an unscrupulous person who wants to steal information, they're going to see your fingerprint. So you can't take that information and you'll be found out. And each person, we all, will own a key to our information, and then we're allowed to, of course, share that key with others. And I believe in expiration date can be assigned to the key we share with others, so they'll be able to allow to access our information for a period of a certain number of hours on a certain day, and then authorization will go away. We can also make payments on the block, not via a bank. And this is going to be really, kind of neat in healthcare, in that patients can be incentivized to do certain things to benefit their own health, like get a COVID vaccination. They can be incentivized with a portion of a Bitcoin. So people can be given micropayments as rewards for completing certain things. And again, nothing on the block can be erased, holding everybody accountable. And that's actually one of the problems that people complain about regarding the block, is that, if you make a mistake digitally, or on a piece of paper, you can white it out or fix it. But once it's on the block, it's stored there forever. Problems with blockchain. Bitcoin mining consumes excessive amounts of energy. So this is huge for someone like myself who's very concerned about her carbon footprint. I read in one article that in order to mine a Bitcoin, it takes the energy of the whole world for one day in order to do this mining. And I was blown away by that. And there's got to be a way that we can somehow do it differently. And I think this is going to be one of the hindrances in moving forward with blockchain implementation globally. Also, the blocks aren't big enough to hold complex medical data. So if we want to send a DNA chain around the world, how are we going to put all the DNA information into a block? The block's going to need to be double the size. So how are we going to do that? People are working on it now, actually, the government and certain ad hoc entities. And again, immutability, once data is put on the chain, whether it's right or wrong, it can't be removed. And there's also talk that groups of miners can try to control more than 50% of a network's mining power. And then that can allow them to block certain people from entering entering information on their block. And this is a big concern that banks are troubled by the possible introduction of Bitcoin and blockchain, because they want to be the centralized control. They want to control 51% of this mining power. And then that will give them the potential to block your access to your finances if that ever occurs. Also, before we implement something, we haven't really developed an approach to establishing blockchain's full potential, because this is really going to overturn the apple cart, and it will change the way we do everything. And what are the ramifications going to be? So scholars are out there now trying to drill down on this, but it's going to take time. So on to the next slide, what needs to happen before blockchain and Bitcoin can be fully utilized? Well, as we said, it consumes a ton of energy, so there's going to have to be some environmental regulations put in place. Financial systems are pushing for laws. They want to control this. They want the government to control this. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs, millions of people. In fact, I mentioned in the healthcare sector, it's the largest employer in the country, and half of those people might lose their jobs. Also, blockchain is going to need a lot of legislative support, and the heel digging hasn't begun. It's really going to be an uphill climb. And again, the blocks themselves will need to be enlarged. And I think that's it. And Curt and I are here to try to answer any questions. We're certainly not experts in the field, but maybe we can help.
Thank you, Victoria. I think that was great. That was a very comprehensive review of what blockchain actually is. And I don't know anybody that explains it better than that.
Wow, thank you.
Well, definitely feel free to unmute yourselves and turn on your cameras if you like. I know we have a lot of questions that have come in for you guys, so I can get them started, or if anybody here that's on the Zoom has some questions they'd like to ask, they can go ahead and go first. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question. Okay, well, I'll just start with what we have in the chat then. So our first question is from Ray. He says, "Thank you for educating me. Please help me understand what a miner actually does. Are they solving an existing mathematical problem, puzzle, etc.? Are they breaking a code?"
Well, let me attempt to answer that first, and then I'd like Victoria also to chime in. What a miner does is exactly as you suggested. They break a code. They use lots of electricity and computers to do that. And for example, Bitcoin has a finite number of coins that will eventually be mined. There's 21 million coins that will be mined over the next couple of years. And it probably won't even be that large, because some people have lost their Bitcoin when they can't remember their keys or their passwords or things like that. So there'll probably be less than 21 million. And that does two things. It prevents Bitcoin from being involved with inflation, for example, like gold or silver might be. But it also, and one of the reasons companies like MicroStrategy, which is a very interesting company, that bought millions of dollars of Bitcoin because they don't want to be holding cash when cash is going down. The US dollar has been dropping for years. So instead of holding on to a depreciating asset, they put millions of dollars into Bitcoin, as did Tesla and a number of other companies, because it's the fiat currencies like the US dollar and the euro and other currencies that are losing value, whereas Bitcoin seems to be only going up in value and would not be subjected to inflation. Victoria, would you like to also answer that question?
I think you answered it pretty well. It's kind of a nebulous thing to understand exactly what the miners do, but they are part of also the verification process to make sure that everything remains decentralized. And as I explained in the Sunset Hospital analogy, they are the puzzle solvers. When the employees at the hospital were handed the Rubik's Cube, and the first person to finish the Rubik's Cube was rewarded with a Bitcoin. He was the miner. And again, I wish I could explain the mechanism better, but I'm certainly not an expert on it. I do have some good reference articles that I can forward to Carolina, and then she can, at your request, forward them on to you.
Thank you.
We have a question here from, I believe it's Kenya. Good afternoon. Do you mind sharing from what school you obtained your healthcare administration degree?
Southern New Hampshire University. I could do it from the island, right at my computer. It was simple, fun, and quick.
We have a comment followed by a question. Ray says, this reminds me a bit of theater's Hamilton, in that a disruptive force, the colonists, push back against the established power holders, the British. How will this disruptive system fare against existing societal power holders like banks, governments, etc.?
Ray, we don't know. And as I said, I think a lot of entities are going to dig in their heels. And I think that I don't know if what I presented today will ever come to fruition, because it's so disruptive that the only way it could be actualized is through baby steps over the course of decades. For instance, the blockchain growing in another region, like to send medical data throughout the world. So if we can achieve that, then upon that, other things can grow. So it's going to have to prove itself in a very important arena before it garners enough support that others are going to jump on board. So it's not impossible, but I think it's going to take decades of dedicated people within certain disciplines to really be able to prove that this is worthy of more broad implementation.
Well, one of the comments that I would make about that in the analogy is people trying to leave Nazi Germany and taking their possessions with them. And, people had gold and diamonds and jewelry, and it was difficult to take them out of the country. Right now, you can take your whole cryptocurrency investments, no matter how much you own of that, and get on a plane and leave and eventually tap into all of that. And so in some places around the world where the currencies of that country are decreasing, and you want to get out with some of your wealth that you've accumulated, the use of cryptocurrencies is a way to do that. For example, in China, there are rules that you can't leave the country with a certain amount of money. Well, cryptocurrencies obviates the need for that, because you can just leave and then tap into your cryptocurrency account. So I think that emphasizes the idea that this is not only a United States entity, it's a worldwide entity. So any individual government that tries to clamp down on the use of the blockchain is not going to be successful, because it's an international phenomena, and it's not going to be able to be shut down by any one country. And Victoria is absolutely right that it would be important to have legislation monitor all of this and try to do it and control it to make it better, not try to destroy it. And I think that will happen. I think that's definitely in the works.
So if I could build on your answer to my question just a little bit, and first of all, thank you both so much for presenting this. I'm very much a novice, very much wanting to get to know what this Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is all about. In your example, it had been mentioned in the presentation that I could give the key to the IRS once a year to check my transactions for the prior year. What's to stop China in this instance from wanting to see my Bitcoin purse or my cryptocurrency holdings before I'm allowed to board that airplane?
Well, because you hold the key. If they don't have your key, they can't get into that. And if you give your key to the IRS, I doubt if they're going to give it to anybody. So you completely control the availability to look at any of that. So I think that that's a big protection. Interestingly enough, you mentioned the IRS. I just finished filling out my income tax, and there's a little box that IRS asks you, have you owned any cryptocurrencies or traded them this year? I would advise everybody to check that box like I did, because you'll get in trouble if you say no.
Huh.
So Ray, were you also trying to ask, such as recent discussions regarding the COVID vaccination? People are wondering, are we going to have to show a card of vaccination before we travel to another country or board an airplane? Are you saying that certain countries like China might stipulate that they need to view the contents of what is on our blockchain, let's say, before we travel to their country?
Well, that's what I'm, and this is all me just brainstorming, but I'm real world. If there's a guard with a gun telling me that if I don't reveal my code, I don't get on this airplane, then I can always decide, nope, I'm not giving it up. I'm not going on that airplane. But it is a source of power to where the same way if I have $20 in my wallet and I can bribe that guard to then allow me to get on the airplane, that I'm just trying to explore the possibilities of, the crypto, everything existing sort of in the cloud or on the blockchain is one thing, but when it comes face to face with the reality at the airline gate, has much thought been given about that?
So
I don't.
I'm sorry, Curt.
I don't think you'd have to reveal that you own any cryptocurrency. All you'd have to do is say, what is that? I don't know what that is. There's no way that they can identify you as somebody that owns the cryptocurrency. Because if you have it on, for example, Gemini or Coinbase, they can't tap into that account that you have. And just as another interesting aside about that, so Coinbase and Gemini are what are called soft wallets, where sometimes they would be at risk for being hacked, although those two have never been hacked. But there's a way that you can do what's called a hard wallet, which is, for example, Treasure is a hard wallet that's completely off the internet. That's totally separate. And for the ledger, the Treasure ledger, which is the hard wallet, you have so many codes to get into it that nobody even can tap into that. So that's not available to anybody who even finds your codes, because it's so hard to get into without all sorts of, authentication and everything else. So that's one of the big reasons that this would make sense.
Also, Ray, you might want to know that there's a group of computer geeks out there, some very highly esteemed one, who formed the the action designed research approach. And they're constructing a design model to test these exact things out. So it's all right now theoretically based, and it's shaped by the perspectives of each individual and organization who might be using the Bitcoin and the blockchain in the future. So, so their research is going to create ultimately a set of standards and evaluation tools that can be used by federal regulators.
This is all very fascinating. We have a question here from Tim Connolly. Tim, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question? No? All right, well, we'll just go to the next question then. We have a question here. Dun, dun, dun. Let me see. From Eric, can the key be stolen or forged?
Hi, Eric. Good to see you. Again, I don't know. I can't answer that. I would think that this might be a problem, that people will forget their keys, that people will give their keys out to others who shouldn't have them. And that's one of the things that this action designed research group is looking into. So there'll be more information on that emerging in the months and years to come.
And I would also just say that the key is something that only you know. So if you don't give it to anybody, you're the only one who can use that key, for example, to open your Treasure hard wallet, where you're storing your cryptocurrencies. So I think that that's probably pretty safe if you don't give it to anybody, and there's no way they can guess what it is, because it's a very complicated key. So and there's all sorts of authentication things that you have to do to establish that.
But doesn't, say, like Coinbase have the key?
No, not on what's called a hard wallet. So you buy your coins on Coinbase or on Gemini, and in order to get into your account there, you have to do a two-step authentication where they send you either by email or a text on your phone, and then you have to put that in before you get in there. So somebody would have to have your phone or your computer as you're trying to log into either one of those accounts. And unless they had a gun to your head and had your computer and your iPhone, they wouldn't have that information.
All right, the next question is, it seems Bitcoin has no inherent value or dividend it pays. So is it fair to say that at the current time, the value of Bitcoin is about 99% speculative?
Well, I would say absolutely it's speculative, but that's not entirely true, because there's a thing called BlockFi, where you can deposit your cryptocurrencies and actually gain interest as you hold those entities. And the interest is paid on a month, and it tells you can buy Ether or Bitcoin with any of the interest that you earn in that BlockFi account. There's also a way of staking your Bitcoin and your cryptocurrencies, where you put it on another entity, and that entity gains interest, and every time somebody, for example, if you buy Ether and you stake the Ether on a thing called Celsius, Celsius will pay you about 5 or 6% on the amount that you have in there. And every time somebody uses Ether, you make a little money on the use of Ether. So that's something that could go up, pretty abruptly and significantly. And it's like an interest-bearing account, and the interest is better than you get in the bank.
And I believe, Curt, that Ethereum will go up because it's the platform on which smart contracts are based. So when we are seeing whole countries like Dubai, the government of Dubai is implementing a lot of this. So I'm excited about, investing a bit myself. I already have, and seeing where it goes. But as Curt, you've always mentioned to me, I'm not going to invest more than I can stand to lose. But I do think that we are on an upward trajectory because there's real-time information out there of large corporations and countries themselves that are already in the implementation process. Dubai is such a young country that a lot of their patterns aren't fully entrenched. So they have a greater latitude to jump on the bandwagon with something that's very progressive.
All right, our next question, I'll take one from Facebook here. This is from Jacqueline. Is there a tax person on the island that knows about Bitcoin that you could suggest?
Not I.
I don't know of one, but there are plenty of crypto tax accountants who will look at your portfolio and your transactions and do it for not very much money that can aid in your reporting about profits you made or transactions that you made. And that, as I said earlier, is probably something that if you do a lot of transactions, you probably need to take advantage of. But I think if there's if you go to crypto tax expert on the internet, you'll find a list of people who do that.
I was curious, when you said on your taxes that you did invest in cryptocurrency, what happened after that? Did you have to tell them how much you invested? Did you have to pay tax on that? What are they doing with this information, that knowing that you're investing in the cryptocurrency?
Well, I actually had something from BlockFi that told me what I made from them last year, which I submitted to my accountant, which I haven't heard back yet. So I really can't answer that, what he's going to do with it. But, he needs to help me report it so I don't go to jail.
Well, maybe we'll follow up with that and find out.
Yeah, okay.
Here's another question from Ray. What happens when, not if, one or more system participants experience an electrical power outage?
I think there are protections from that, because you wouldn't necessarily, if you have it on a computer, you wouldn't necessarily lose that, because if you have it stored, for example, on the hard wallet Treasure, that's not going to be affected by an outage. If you have it in Gemini or Coinbase, which is a soft wallet, again, they're not going to be affected by a power outage.
What is to stop governments or other actors from flooding the world with other, so this would be like alt cryptocurrency, like Dogecoin, or their own coins, which I see coins almost every day. I'm getting this alert that there's some new kind of coin I can buy. So that's definitely an interesting question.
Yes. Actually, there are some governments that have tried to do their own country cryptocurrency. And as far as I know, no one's been successful to do that. Amazon also kind of suggested that they might be trying to do some kind of altcoin. And I don't think that's ever come to fruition either. But again, it'd be like any other altcoin that's available. You have a choice of buying that or not. And just because the government does it, even if the United States government did it, it still would be decentralized to some extent. And I don't really think that that's a risk, because so many places around the world are getting involved with this now that it's not something that one government is going to be able to control, which is one of the benefits of it.
I think we've already addressed this question more or less, but I'll read it off. You say it is super safe, but all the faith here is in computers, servers, etc. Why can't these keys be forged or stolen? Why can't you be surveilled? I think we've probably addressed that one already.
Well, I think the only risk is if you don't remember or you lose your key, because then you can't remember what it is to access your account. And that actually has happened, where somebody has a key and they write it down someplace or they record it someplace, and then they don't remember what it is or how to get to it. That is a risk. But I mean, you have to obviously be careful with anything like that.
Well, ultimately, we'll have to have our keys tattooed on our wrists, or in a place that's less, more obscure.
Yeah.
This is also another question from Eric. He says, you say this will be big in the developing world, but how will people with limited access to computers or internet be able to use this? And I actually have a similar question, because I do a lot of international trade, and I'm very curious how so if I sent money, say, to Iraq, to somebody I do trade with, how can they access those funds on their end?
So it requires a smartphone, and most people do have smartphones around the world at this point. Or a person could go to a public library or to a friend's house, as long as they have a code to get in a particular app. The details of which I can't reveal or explain, because that's not my expertise. I did my coursework on the blockchain, but that's how I imagine it will happen, that they will have full access through your cell phones, just like I have full access to my Bitcoin account on my cell phone and can make immediate transactions with that application. Curt, do you have any more to add on that?
What you have, if you start, for example, you sell one of your cryptocurrencies, you will get a message on your phone that went through, and did you really do that? And if you didn't, let us know right away. But also you'll have a code that's like 20 or 30 things long, numbers and alphabet and everything else. And you take that and you save it, and then you paste it to where you want to send it. And the person on the receiving end then gets that information. So it's a fairly complicated process, but it works very smoothly when you do that. But it's a very carefully laid out procedure when you want to do anything, when you want to buy something with cryptocurrencies, or you want to transfer it, or give it to one of your kids, which I've done, and they understand how to do all that, and it's on your phone or on your iPad or on your computer, and it's very straightforward and I believe very, very safe. So if you have somebody, as Victoria says, that even has an iPhone, then you can do that. They have an app on your iPhone where they can access all this, and where you can transfer some cryptocurrency to anybody, any place in the world.
So I understand that aspect of it, but then how do they, say in Morocco, they take the cryptocurrency they have, how do they turn that into money they can actually spend there?
Well, they can always just sell. So let's suppose you send them, 1 Ethereum. They can take that and they can cash that in right away. And then if they hook it up to a bank account, they can cash it in, and that money from their sale of Ethereum would go right into their bank account in US dollars or whatever currency they want to put it in.
The next question, also from Eric, is, has there ever been a major currency that governments have allowed to exist without any interference? China is doing huge business in Africa. If an African country tries to pay them back in a small amount of Bitcoin or a deflated currency, what is to stop China from enforcing what they would see as their right to receive payment? It would seem you would suddenly have a major disincentive to do business rather than an incentive. It seems maybe Bitcoin could cause as many problems as it could solve. No?
Well, oh, go on, Curt.
Oh, you go ahead, Victoria.
Bitcoin and the blockchain, it is going to create problems, and we're exploring exactly where those areas are going to be. Some of them we know, some of them are unknown, but as Curt said, because it's a decentralized platform, there's no centralized authority. There's no Chinese government or US government or banking system at the heart of Bitcoin. It is it's spread out through millions of computer networks throughout the world, not on one centralized server. So I don't think the Chinese government or any other government would know what you've got in your wallet unless you allowed them access to that.
Well, the other thing is, if you look at the outline that I gave, there's a thing to click on, which will tell you all of the companies that currently will accept Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And, Victoria mentioned that Tesla, you can now buy a $50,000 Tesla automobile with Bitcoin. So I would think that a country that says they don't want to deal in Bitcoin is going to lose out, because there are so many companies around the world that will accept these cryptocurrency payments. Microsoft, Subway, a bunch of these other companies all accept cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin mainly, but also others as well. So I think that that's not likely to be a problem. It's a problem for China if they don't want to accept it, I think, not for the person who wants to do some transactions using cryptocurrencies.
Another question from Eric. If you don't reveal that you have any crypto and the whole world is using it, then you would get to China, and how would you spend it now? You would need two currencies, right? And that would defeat the whole point, right?
Well, I believe that if you had, for example, you had Bitcoin and you showed up in China, you could convert your Bitcoin to the yuan or whatever the Chinese currency is. And I would think that most people there would be willing to take your Bitcoin for a currency that's devaluating over time.
And there's new currency exchange apps that they either can already or will be able to do that for you. And also the Bitcoin, it's just, I think, as we move forward, this is just going to be something that's going to be accounted for, in the way we globally process things. So just stay tuned, because I know I just invested some money in a company that is creating one of those conversion apps. So I'm following it fairly closely. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that in the future.
Do you mind revealing what company that is?
It is, I'll let you know in just a moment.
Our next question comes from Baby Yoda. What's your take on trading Bitcoin on the Robinhood app?
I think you could do that. In fact, Robinhood is a very innovative way to do that. I haven't done that, but I understand that that's a reasonable way to do it.
So the company is Forwardly, and they've merged with TSNP.
All right, I think we have Eric here who wants to ask a question himself. So
Thank
go
you.
ahead, Eric.
Thank you very much. These are some really interesting questions and answers. I'm a little confused about a couple things. Are you suggesting that, let's say in the year 2050, Bitcoin would be just a currency, or are you suggesting it would be the currency? Like it's going to replace all currencies, or it has the potential to replace all currencies, or it will have to exist side by side with other currencies? Because in those two different cases, I think you would have two very different worlds. What this is all reminding me of, I think Ray asked some really good practical questions about getting on an airplane. You know, you go to China and now what happens? And the reason I think that I just want to, it kind of reminds me a little bit like there's this thing in the Harry Potter world called the Vanishing Cabinet, where you put something in on one side and it pops out on the other. My grandfather came up with a similar idea for my father at one point. He said, "This is what I want you to do." He goes, one of these days I want you to buy a whole bunch of gold bars and I just want you to put them in a safe. He goes, and then I'll give you the key. And then someday later on, the government just won't get it. They just won't know we have it. But there seem to be a lot of practical concerns with that I have a hard time imagining how you would get around. I'm having a hard time imagining how taxation will work in a Bitcoin world and how security would work. Like if you make a good case, Curtis, when you get to China, you can just sell your Bitcoin. But if you told the Chinese authorities, hey, I don't have any Bitcoin, and then you get on the plane and you go to China and you buy some stuff, when you get back on the plane, wouldn't the Chinese authorities be like, hey, where'd all that stuff come from? So I'm a little curious about some of the practical concerns here, and I know that was a mouthful right there, but if you could answer some of those things, maybe, or try to piece out what I'm not understanding, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I think the two possible scenarios that you mentioned, both are possible. You could have Bitcoin operating with other currencies like the US dollar simultaneously, or you could have people wanting more to use Bitcoin for their transactions than the US dollar. But I don't think the US dollar is ever going to go away unless it continues to depreciate so much that it's not worth anything. Like, other companies and other countries have had their currencies depreciating. But I think it's possible that in 20 years, Bitcoin might be the currency of choice. Victoria, what do you think?
I agree, Curt. And I think maybe this will cause some depreciation of the US dollar. There's just so many unknown variables that are yet to unfold, but they're being researched right now.
So it seems like to me at this point, say if I was interested in using Bitcoin when I travel, I would still have to exchange that Bitcoin for US dollars in my app and have that sent to my bank. And then I could use an ATM to get the money out in the other country.
As Curt said earlier, right now, we're not quite at that stage. Curt earlier advised to let's just, invest what we can in a sensible way and use it as a vehicle of investment, and the rest will come later. Is that correct, Curt?
Yes. The other thing is that there are ATMs where you can actually buy Bitcoin. You go to an ATM that advertises that you can buy Bitcoin and you put in US dollars or transfer from your bank, and they'll put you on a ledger where you've just bought, 1/100th of a Bitcoin, if that's what you wanted to buy. And there are more and more of these cryptocurrency ATMs that are propping up all over the country.
And it sounds like there's certain merchants that are accepting Bitcoin. So I could satisfy my hunger for a Subway meatball sub today, and in a couple weeks regret it because I could have had
Mansion in Del Rey.
I could have had a brand new car from Elon Musk.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, the pizza example is a good example of that. That's the first transaction with Bitcoin was to buy a pizza, and he gave him 10,000 Bitcoins. Well, that's worth millions of dollars today. So that guy has big regrets about spending 10,000 Bitcoin on a pizza.
I had two questions, if I could, and I hate the idea that I'm asking so many out of the group, but the first is sort of a nuts and bolts. I understand one or both of you mentioned a 21 million blocks or puzzles within Bitcoin, that it is a finite amount.
Yes.
And so that would prevent inflation and that type of thing. I'm just
Correct.
trying to understand the mechanics of, does then there become a Bitcoin 2 once that 21 million sounds like it's going to take a while to exhaust, but I'm guessing that we will exhaust them.
So there'll be
and then my second, and then if I could, and then I'll be quiet. My second question has more to do with how each of you both got involved in cryptocurrencies and your interest in it. And is there a point, right now we seem to be ascending in interest and it's gathering steam. Is there a point at which each of you has said, if I see this, I'm going to back out, I'm going to sell my holdings or sell part of them? And anyways, that's and thank you again so much for this education today.
Well, your questions have been great and very much appreciated by, I'm sure, both of us. I think that the amount that you put in, first of all, doesn't have to be very much. You could put $100 in and you can buy a portion of a Bitcoin or Ethereum or one of those things. And a lot of people just do that and just forget about it. They put it away like any other asset and just forget about it. I can tell you how I was at a stem cell meeting with my son, who was the CEO of a stem cell company. The first floor had 1,000 people at this stem cell conference. The second floor was doing a cryptocurrency symposium that had like 100 people. They had an ATM machine that you could buy Bitcoin. That's how I bought my first Bitcoin. And my son said, "Dad, what are you doing? Do you don't even know what that is?" I said, "Yeah, but I heard about it." So that's how I got involved. Kind of, crazy. But then I started reading about it and educating myself about it. And it just seemed to make more and more sense as I did that. Victoria, how did you get involved?
Through you. So I know I bumped into you, and I mentioned that I was struggling to find a topic for my capstone project for my master's degree, and you said, "Oh, well, you just got to do it on the Bitcoin or cryptocurrency." And I was scratching my head thinking, well, how the heck is that possible? And then you invited me to the conference that you put together with wonderful speakers from all over the world, and it piqued my interest, and I began investigating, and I realized, wow, this blockchain is going to solve some real world issues. But Eric, you had also asked about different versions of the blockchain, and I can answer that question. So in 2009, the blockchain was invented, and that was blockchain 1.0. But then in 2014, someone decided that, oh, we can put a smart contract, but we can put code into the block and then put contracts in there that are executed when terms of the contract are satisfied. So thus emerged the Ethereum and blockchain 2.0 in 2014. So I imagine we're going to see a blockchain 3.0 somewhere down the line where they can store complex medical data and other things.
Well, and let me also go back to the question. So in about a year or two, there'll be no more than 21 million Bitcoins. Right now, there's about 18 million. But people also have predicted that because people have lost their keys, they may have lost some of the Bitcoin. So it may not even reach the 21 million mark. And again, you hit right on the point about that. Does that mean that it's not going to be inflated? When all of the Bitcoin will be mined, I think that will be a reason that it will go up even more, because it will be a limited resource at that point. All the Bitcoin available will be on the market. So there'll be people wanting to get involved with that who will be bidding on the Bitcoin, which will drive the price up with all the predictions that I see.
Yeah, so are there, I think, anticipating it to go up to 400,000 in the next few years?
Well, the thing that I read, and there's a very complex way of predicting that. They said in 2021, Bitcoin should be anywhere between 100,000 per coin and 250,000. So, 400,000 is not unrealistic, and there's predictions that even go higher than that. But obviously, that's very speculative.
So is that why there are also these altcoins coming up that could be, I know they're mined in a different way, is what I've read, than Bitcoin. So there's a finite amount of Bitcoin, but then there are these altcoins that you could invest in also. And the altcoins, can make it or not. Like some I've heard have just disappeared entirely. So how do you know what altcoins you should be investing in, or is it worthwhile to invest in these altcoins?
Well, you're absolutely right that some of them have come out and they've had all this hype and advertising, and a year later they're gone. So any money that you put in those would have been lost. That's absolutely true. And certainly the people hyping that are going to tell you that they bought an altcoin for 10 cents and now it's $10. And that's true. Some of those coins have appreciated that much. But there's thousands of them now. If you list them, there's over 1,000 altcoins, and it's hard to know which ones may be of value 5 years from now. But there also are services that look at that and can give you advice about those things. And let's suppose you take $10 and you put $10 in each of 10 different altcoins, and one of them goes from 10 cents to $50. You've made all the money that on those 9 that you lost. And I think that's one of the things that people tout with trying to do that. But you're absolutely right. It's my advice: don't put more money than you can afford to lose in any of this. And I think that certainly applies to the altcoin market, which is very, very hard to understand what the value of some of them might be or is presently.
It is very interesting to research some of these altcoins, though, and to read about how some of them are trying to mine in a more environmentally friendly way, for example. So I think, it's a little like investing in a stock where you research and you decide, is that worth investing in? It's all a little bit of a gamble, but if you educate yourself, you might be able to make a good educated guess as to what to invest in.
Yes.
I love the fact, Curtis, that unlike being in Vegas and putting a quarter in the slot machine, you put a couple bucks in the ATM for the Bitcoin, and it pays so much in dividends. Even if you lose your investment, which you do most of the time in Vegas, it spurs you on. You've got a stake in this new technology, and you want to learn more about it and find out more about it, and so it's valuable just from that standpoint. And I had also promised that I wouldn't speak again, but I just wanted to do a huge shout out to the Oak Bluffs Library for for having this program. And this to me is exactly what libraries are for. Among all the things that libraries do, introducing folks like me to and teaching us more about something new in the world is just a perfect use of library resources.
Right,
So
well,
thank you.
I'll make one last comment. There's a thing abbreviated FOMO, which is fear of missing out. And I think that's where we are with cryptocurrencies.
All right, well, I'm sure we could continue talking about this all day, but we have reached the end of our time here. And I wanted to thank you both so much for being here and for sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you for the wonderful compliment, Ray. Very much appreciated. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you learned something and continue to explore this and learn more about it. And good luck.
Thank you for
Thank
putting,
you, Carolina, and everyone.
thank you as well.
Right. Have a good day, everybody.
You too.